A lot of people think Google's just a search box and Facebook's just a place to see what my friends are doing. What they don't realize is there's entire teams of engineers whose job is to use your psychology against you.
There were meaningful changes happening around the world because of these platforms. I think we were naive about the flip side of that coin.
That was a look at the recent Netflix documentary entitled The Social Dilemma. Everybody should watch it. It took a look at how social media algorithms manipulate the users. Now, a new book argues the digital world that was meant to bring people together is actually the reason we are more divided than ever. The book is entitled The Chaos Machine, the inside story of how social media rewired our minds and our world. And its author, international reporter and columnist at the New York Times, Max Fisher, joins us now. Max, thank you for writing this book. And just to point out, one of the key sort of revelations in The Social Dilemma was that the very people interviewed, the people who create social media, do not allow their children on social media. That's all you need to know, because it is officially, we can argue with all the different data out there, destroying our children's minds.
Yes, that was one of the, I think, real revelations for me reporting this book, was how much evidence we now have that we didn't have a few years ago, when I think a lot of us were just operating on a suspicion that social media had some effect, that we now have an enormous amount of rigorous scientific empirical research that shows us not just the scale at which social media is changing us, is changing what we think, is changing our internal natures, but the evidence that this is something the platforms are doing quite deliberately.
Yeah. So Max, why don't you answer the $64,000 question? How could the concept of social media, when we first heard about it, seemed to be something that would unite us? I remember me hearing about how text messages had helped organize the Orange Revolution in Ukraine, and it was all very heady stuff. And we thought the same would happen with social media. The exact opposite occurred. Why is that?
So there are two ideas behind social media that are completely in tension. One is this original idea that it will be this forum that will bring us together, and that is something that is at least a potential that exists in a more neutral social media. But the other factor that has become the overwhelmingly dominant force is that it is designed to deliberately manipulate your emotions to get you to spend more time online. And I can give you an example of this. When you go onto any social media platform, whichever one you use, you think that what you are seeing are the thoughts, the ideas, the sentiments of people in your community, your friends, people who you follow, and that is false. That's actually not what you are seeing at all. What you are in fact seeing are the sentiments and the ideas that have been pre-selected for you by these incredibly powerful algorithms and automated systems that have identified these types of content and these types of interactions that will get you to spend as much time on the platform as possible, and will get you to actually post yourself to contribute to this. And this has been incredibly successful, not just at driving up people's time on the platform so that the platforms can sell you more ads and can make more money, but actually we now know can change your underlying nature as a person. There's this one experiment that I write about in the book that I found really fascinating and telling, where these researchers sat down a bunch of research subjects, and before the experiment, they kind of gauged them on their internal emotional nature, their basic temperament. How prone were they to outrage as people? And they would have each of them then send a fake, because it was all a controlled experiment, a fake tweet with some outrage in it, because we know that outrage is a sentiment that the platforms really reward. If you have any kind of post on any kind of platform with outrage in it, the system will pick that out and it will shove that in front of huge numbers of people, because it knows that's a sentiment that will get other people to engage with you, that will then get you to engage in turn, and everyone spends more time on the platform. And what the experimenters found was if they showed some of those users their fake tweets after the fact that had these really big engagement numbers on them, the little retweet and the like number had gone way up, what they found is that subjects who had even expressed a real aversion to outrage before the experiment, didn't like outrage, didn't like to express it, would become, once they did this a few times, much more prone not just to sending more outraged tweets because they had internalized that sense of reward and that sense that that was what their community wanted, even though it was entirely faked by the platforms, but they actually became more prone to feeling outraged internally and in their offline life when they were away from the computers. And this is one of like a dozen different ways that I write about in the book that the platforms can actually, by manipulating you so effectively to be online, change your behavior, change the way that your mind works, and change your politics, which, of course, at the scale of billions of users, turns out to be enormously consequential.
So, Max, every couple of years we see executives from Facebook or Twitter or YouTube dragged before Congress, and they're asked relatively for them easy questions to answer, but they say, no, this is not our design. We're here to bring people together. But you're describing something that, I mean, evil is a strong word, but if you know, if you know that this is what it's doing to people, if you know that this is what it's doing to young girls, and this is your business model, and you're pushing harder on that and you're amplifying it, is there any hope for reform internally, or is it going to have to come from the government? And if so, what does that even look like?
So one of the fascinating things to me on this exact point, where the people who run the platforms will say, oh, it's a neutral platform, we don't do this, is that if you go back 10 years and you look at old business conferences, if you look at the kind of internal discussions at these platforms, they used to be quite open before they knew not to be about the fact that they were designing these systems to be deliberately addictive and deliberately manipulative, and to become the intermediaries that govern all information consumption, the way that we relate to one another. So to your point, that is something that is baked in not just to the technology of how these platforms work, but is their fundamental business model, because that's how they make their money, is by getting you to spend more time online so that they can sell more ads to you. So there's a lot of discussion about what's the regulation, how do we set new rules for what's allowed on the platforms, not allowed on the platforms. It's a little bit like regulating the kinds of packaging that you can put on cigarettes or the kinds of filters that you can put on cigarettes. It might have an effect at the margins, but the basic core of these companies is to get you to buy more cigarettes, to spend more time with their products.
Here we go again with cigarettes. It's the new cigarettes. The new book is The Chaos Machine, the inside story of how social media rewired our minds and our world. An incredibly important book by Max Fisher. Thank you very much for coming on the show this morning.
Thanks, Max.
We appreciate it.